Still without a veteran linebacker added this offseason, could the New Orleans Saints be higher on a player that we're potentially undervaluing? We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget you could subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to keep the conversation going, you can head over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints. You can also catch me every Tuesday over on Locked On NFL Podcast and here with you every single Monday through Friday and then some on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, will we see more from Bryan, Bresee, and Isaiah Foskey at OTA Week 2? The defense continues to lead by example. Could it be even more so this week? But first, what's next for the New Orleans Saints at linebacker? This is a position going into the offseason that many of us believed that the Saints would potentially address in the draft. Now, they did address it in undrafted free agency after the draft. Tulane's Nick Anderson added to the roster, as well as Vanderbilt linebacker Anthony Orji. But the Saints have not yet gone out and signed a veteran linebacker. Now, it is only May 29th, May 30th. And so there's still a ton of time for the Saints to be able to add a veteran linebacker. And there are still some good names out on the market, but with an all-new defensive line, with your defensive starters showing up and participating at OTAs, it feels like this would be a good time, or ahead of OTAs would have been a good time to get another veteran signed. However, that does not change what veterans around the league want, which might be not to sign before OTAs and instead to wait until before training camp to sign so that they could be a part of that. You think back to other guys like Ndamukong Suh, who have pretty much straight up said, I'll be ready for week 1. Don't worry about me in no training camp. So the Saints do still have time to address their linebacker room, but in the meanwhile, they get to learn a lot more about the depth behind their two bona fide starters in, of course, veteran and one of the best linebackers in the NFL, Demario Davis, and one of the best young linebackers in the NFL, former second-round pick out of Ohio State, Pete Werner. While the Saints are getting a look at the guys behind them, we could be learning a little bit here that the Saints value a player that we haven't paid as much attention to and haven't had as much exposure to as the New Orleans Saints, to be fair. And that is last year's draft selection out of App State, Demarco Jackson. Could Demarco Jackson actually be the guy that the Saints are perfectly comfortable with being behind guys like Demario Davis and Pete Werner? And here's the other piece of that question that's very interesting, because Zach Bond has to factor into this as long as he's on the roster as well. Now, Zach Bond might not be the guy that's right behind Demario Davis and Pete Werner, but he could still be the third linebacker. Here's how that would work. If the Saints feel like Demarco Jackson, from what they've gotten to see from him while he was on injured reserve, working in, film rooms, working in weight rooms, working throughout his rehabilitation, things like that, working and getting to know the coaches, getting to know him, the staff still working with him. Just because we haven't seen him on the field doesn't mean that he hasn't still been working and developing relationships and instilling confidence in the coaches that are around him. So perhaps there's something about Demarco Jackson, who we were all very excited about, especially where the Saints got him in the draft last year in day 3, that he could potentially be a guy that's done enough to impress the Saints enough to say, okay, let's get a look at him during OTAs, mandatory minicamps, and then we can make different decisions by the time that the team heads into training camp. Now, here's how the idea of the third linebacker versus the next primary guy behind Demario Davis and Pete Werner, why there's a delineation there. The third linebacker is effectively saying, in our sense when we discuss the New Orleans Saints defense, strong side linebacker. The New Orleans Saints play a lot of 4-2-5 defenses. That's 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, and then 5 cover guys, 5 defensive backs. That can be any combination of safeties and corners, of course. And so if the Saints look at Demario Jackson as an off-ball linebacker, that would not make him the 3rd linebacker in terms of the definition as the 3rd linebacker on the field in their system. The 3rd linebacker in the system is usually an on-ball linebacker, i.e., somebody that knows where the ball is going and focuses on going after the ball, a primary run stopper, a pass rusher. Effectively what Caden Ellis was when Pete Werner was healthy. They utilized Caden Ellis as a pass rusher last year. We've talked before about breakout candidates for the New Orleans Saints. My selection was Carl Granderson, but I acknowledge that Peyton Turner could be a part of that conversation as well. Well, if the New Orleans Saints utilize Zach Bond to have him do the thing that he was great at in college at Wisconsin, rush the passer, he could potentially be a little bit of a breakout candidate as well. I only hedge a little bit of a breakout candidate, not because of my lack of faith in his ability to be able to produce, but the role is going to present a lack of opportunity. So it's not going to allow a lot of opportunities for him to break out. But for a guy like Demario Jackson, if he shows you that he can drop back in coverage, that he can go sideline to sideline, that he can be the next off-ball linebacker in the Saints system, then that firmly implants him behind guys like Demario Davis and Pete Werner without actually making him the guy that would be on the field with Demario Davis and Pete Werner. What makes me think of this? Well, during the first week of OTAs, Demario Davis was not present. When Demario Davis was not present, it wasn't one of the guys that was healthy and on the field for the Saints last year. Nephi Sewell was available. He was on the practice squad. Some of these other linebackers were available on the practice squad. It was not them that lined up next to Pete Werner as the primary coverage linebacker. No, it was Demario Jackson, who missed his entire rookie season because of a preseason injury that sent him to preseason injured reserve. So clearly, the New Orleans Saints feel very good about what it is that Demario Jackson can be and want to get a bigger look at him. So perhaps the reason that the Saints have not been in a rush to go out and sign and find a veteran or even draft a young rookie to come in and be that next off-ball linebacker for the New Orleans Saints is because they believe he's already in the building. And again, that's a different conversation than the strong side on-ball linebacker, which the more that Zach Bond gets his opportunities to pin his ears back and try to speed around the edge and get after the pass rusher, speed around the edge and try to make plays in the run game, he might be in a little bit of a better position than what we've seen him in the past when they've tried to convert him to an off-ball linebacker. So there could be 2 guys that the New Orleans Saints are intrigued by, interested in, and encouraged by that maybe we're just not giving enough credit just yet. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints are going to be headed back to their second week of OTAs, and that means we're going to be taking a look at the things we can't wait to see and the things we want to learn about the defense, and the first of which is their ability to lead by example. Got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. Yeah, it's that good. Covered in 100% real chocolate. Built Bars are just the absolute best. Listen to some of these flavors: salted caramel, cookies and cream, mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, cherry barcia. They've also got some great stuff like chocolate orange, if you're into sort of that chocolate and citrus blend, which I'm a fan of myself. You can go check it out today over at built.com. But don't worry, you can also get it without having to wait for the order to show up. If you've got a Walmart or a Sam's Club near you, you can head over to Walmart in the pharmacy section, 4-bar block boxes of some all-star flavors that are going to carry 17, 18 grams of protein, only 130 calories, and 4 or 5 grams of sugar. Or you can head over to Sam's Club if you got one near you. You can get a 13-bar box of some massive hit flavors like Churro Puff as well as Brownie Batter Puff, which are the marshmallow, protein-infused marshmallow protein bars. Also, by the way, covered in 100% dark chocolate. So don't wait. Go and check them out today. Walmart, Sam's Club, and Built.com. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, taking a look at some of the things that we're hoping to learn about the New Orleans Saints defense in OTA Week 2. Remember, the first week was really all about how many defensive players show up, what's the attendance going to be like, do we get to start seeing a little bit of that battle between Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo for the CB2 spot? All of those things still apply this week, right? Will we see the Saints go from 90% attendance to 93, 95% of attendance? That's still very much a valid question. Do we see Marshon Lattimore as a part of that? And does that give the Saints the opportunity to rotate both Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo with first team opposite him? There's going to be a lot of fun stuff to get a whole bunch of looks at. But one of the things that has been absolutely established when it comes to the New Orleans Saints is that they get the opportunity here to watch their defense continue to lead by example. And that's a great thing for New Orleans. We appreciate you, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. For all the everydayers out there, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, continuing to show all the support that you show. If the New Orleans Saints see their defensive attendance tick up, there were not a lot of defensive players that were missing. Marshon Lattimore, Demario Davis, of course, were the headliners in that conversation. But for the most part, the Saints had their defense absolutely be a part of what their OTA brand and everything looked like. And this was huge for Dennis Allen. He had a whole new defensive line come in this year effectively. It was huge for Cam Jordan, who continues to show up and be a leader through OTAs. The same for Tyrann Mathieu. And so for New Orleans, I think what we're waiting to see is, does a guy like Demario Davis attend? Now, let me make this very, very clear. When I ask that question, it's because I think that there's a benefit to Demario Davis attending, but it doesn't mean that if he doesn't attend, that he's somehow letting the team down or that he is not showing up for his team. I'll remind you, he's been at the Saints facility. He's been photographed in the indoor facility, sweating bullets, working out with Cam Jordan and Chris Olave and Tyrann Mathieu and Alontae Taylor. He's been there. But will he be out at OTAs this week? Why would that be important? It's simple. Just like it's important on the offensive side for the New Orleans Saints offense to be able to work with their signal caller, Derek Carr, the same benefit can be had for the defense being around to work with their primary shot caller, their primary communicator in Demario Davis. As long as there's not a plan for Pete Werner to be that primary communicator. Now, we should be fair here. This does give Pete Werner and others opportunities to build that muscle, to be the primary communicator, to call the shots, to do all those things. So there's actually value for Demario when Demario Davis isn't around. Not so much that you wouldn't want him around, but if you have a guy like Demario Davis present and you get a guy like Marshon Lattimore back out there, which we'll see how that all goes. I don't know if maybe that's connected to the kidney issue that he had last year, the lacerated kidney that he had last year or whatever. But either way, getting both of those guys around can certainly have its benefit. There's no doubt about that. Then maybe we wait until mandatory mini camps for that to happen. But if that were to work out, the Saints, one way or another, do get a lot of opportunity here, and they do get to show that their defense leads by example. Marcus May, Tyrann Mathieu, Cameron Jordan, guys like Paulson Adebo, as well as Alontae Taylor. They're all out there. They're all getting work in. Pete Werner getting work in. Malcolm Roach on a second contract or another contract getting work in. You're seeing that the Saints absolutely have the leadership one way or another. Adding to that leadership obviously can't hurt. Not adding to anything at all also wouldn't hurt. So the bottom line here is that the Saints absolutely have shown a dedication to being out there, whether it's at OTAs proper or it's otherwise around or in the facility, getting work in and working and developing more communication and chemistry with the new players and the other players that are around. But for New Orleans, it's kind of bigger than just, are these players out on the field and are these players out there when the media is out there? That's not really the bottom line. That's just what we get to see. But it doesn't tell the whole story. The whole story is told elsewhere. The whole story is told when Demario Davis is out there before OTAs even begin, working with the team in the indoor facility. The entire story begins being told when a guy like Foskey Moreau, I know this is over on the offensive side, but bear with me, when Foskey Moreau gets cleared of his Hodgkin's lymphoma, or gets medically cleared through that treatment or from that treatment on a Tuesday, signs a contract on a Wednesday, and then is out there Thursday morning at 7:30 working with Derek Carr and other receivers and pass catchers and other offensive pieces. The leadership for the team is absolutely there. And you'll remember that at this time last year, one of our biggest question marks is, where does the leadership come from? No more Drew Brees, no more Sean Payton. Does Dennis Allen step up into that role? With what I saw at OTAs last week, I saw a little bit more of a familiar presence from the head coach, Dennis Allen, in there, working with people, talking to him, getting up close and having conversations with people, correcting, doing all these other things. You're seeing it all come to fruition. You're seeing it all come together. And I think that Derek Carr's ability to be able to maintain things over on the offensive side could help to keep Dennis Allen more involved over on the defensive side and be the nitpicky attention to details guy that he likes to be, while Derek Carr can be the nitpicky offensive guy, right? Guy on offense, not offensive guy. So I do think that the presence is important, but I also think that it's important to remember the full story doesn't just happen when media is present. In fact, a larger part of the story happens when we're not present, and so we rely on what we hear. And so I think that like having a guy like Demario Davis present, having a guy like Marshon Lattimore present definitely has its benefits, but don't get it twisted. The New Orleans Saints are still very much a defense that is being led by example, and the examples that they have in Demario Davis, in Marshon Lattimore, in Tyrann Mathieu, in Cam Jordan are some of the best examples that you can set for a young defense. Or let's call it not just a young defense, but a new defense, a young to one another defense. So many changes on that New Orleans Saints defense so far this offseason, particularly on the defensive line, a little bit at the second level, but particularly on the defensive line. So the Saints getting their opportunity to see as many of their leaders out on the field as possible could potentially see a bit of a boost tomorrow or today, as you know, I'm recording this the night before, but today when we get out to OTAs. But if it doesn't, no need to hit the panic button at all. The one thing that I would really like to see, though, is more reps in team drills for guys like Bryan Bresee and Isaiah Foskey. Will they get those opportunities, and why would that be so important? We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at Bryan Bresee and Isaiah Foskey. They were a topic of conversation for our live evening show on Monday night as well, as we were kind of taking a look at the roadblocks or obstacles or hurdles that they have left to jump in order to be those massively impactful rookies that you certainly hope for them to be. Okay, maybe not massively, but you get it, right? Like impactful rookies that you hope for them to be. Now, of course, their ability to be impactful isn't entirely contingent upon making those leaps and jumping those hurdles, but it can certainly be, their outlook can be impacted with those steps forward. They're certainly aided by those steps forward. If you want a little bit more on that, you can go back to yesterday's episode, but the bottom line of it is that Bryan Bresee being able to open up opportunities for other people, being able to anchor and hold on to some of those blocks, and being able to keep offensive linemen engaged so that they're able to open up some gaps and run fits and stuff like that for second level players and edge rushers. As for Isaiah Foskey, it's a little bit more about understanding and having different pass rushing plans based upon his film study and the types of offensive tackles that he's going to go up against in the NFL. That's the spark notes of it. The reason why I really want to see, and let me just tell you this, I really want to see more Bryan Bresee, more Isaiah Foskey in first, second team reps at the second week of OTAs starting today, is because that's kind of where all of this gets started. They have to get to the point where they're starting to compete against the guys in front of them as much as possible. I believe they got more third team reps last week, but that wasn't a lot. You only really saw 2 of those reps. Jake Haener led all of that. So getting up to the second team, getting up to the first team over time is going to be really important for Bryan Bresee and Isaiah Foskey to get a little bit more opportunity ahead of them so that they can show, hey, look, making this improvement. Hey, look, I made that improvement. Hey, look, I took this step forward. Hey, look, I jumped this hurdle. Those things are going to be really important for them. But without opportunity and without time on the field, or to go back to the Drew Brees days, time on task, which is feeling a little bit more like today's days as well, by the way, the focus on time on task, the focus on chemistry building. It's why you had 79, 80 of your 89 rostered players on the field last week. And you might see more than that, or potentially less than that this week. We'll see how it all goes. But that time on task increases as you kind of climb up the team hierarchy, if you will. We saw, I think it was 4 or 5, maybe 6 plays of team drills for the first team. The second team only saw like 3, and then the third team saw like 2. And that was kind of it when it came to those team drills. And that was the very first practice of the season, right? So it's not a situation to where you're ramped up and you're in rhythm and you know everything and you're safe and all that other stuff. You're still building up over the course of these OTAs. It's going to be a lot more action-packed when it comes to training camp, but you'd certainly love to see guys like Bryan, Bresee, and Isaiah Foskey, who you want to be these impactful rookies, taking these steps, leaps, bounds, and everything during OTAs, because that only means better and bigger and better things for them going into that 2023 season and going into 2023's training camp. So the things that they're going to have to do in order to be able to show that they can continue to climb up that ladder and get more playing opportunities, a big part of it for Isaiah Foskey is learning the new positions. He started to learn that 4-eye position over the course of rookie minicamps, which, just as a reminder, 4-eye is when you're an edge rusher and you're lined up over the inside shoulder of the offensive tackle. So if it's the right tackle, you're over the left shoulder. If it's the left tackle, you're over the right shoulder. That's a little bit more of a run-stopping defensive spot, but it also gives you the opportunity to be able to cleanly attack those C gaps, the B gaps, the gap in between the guard and tackle, where you can start to see a little bit of that, some of that almost interior penetration, but certainly inside penetration, more direct pathway to the ball carrier. So that's a big part of what Isaiah Foskey's got to do, is get comfortable with some of the new things, alignments, techniques that he's being asked to play. That will take some time. But if you start to see him climb up the ladder, that's like the equivalent to watching a player on the offensive side start to get a better grasp of the playbook, the personnel groupings, the routes that they're running, the concepts, things like that. That's kind of the equivalent over on the defensive line side. As for Bryan Bresee, I think a big part of it is really just, it's the time on task conversation. The more that he's out there, the more opportunities he's going to continue to have. And I'm sure that they're working on some new things with him as well, trying to clean up technique. Todd Grantham up there, in there all the time, like working in kind of tweaking around with these guys and everything, and making sure that they're always learning something. They're always getting coaching. They're always getting adjustments. They're always getting feedback. And that's exactly what these rookies need, especially guys like Bresee and Foskey, who are clearly very hungry for improvement, very hungry for information. And so as you continue to give those guys that, then they'll continue to develop. They'll continue to boost. They'll continue to rise up. Not a Falcons reference. Not a Falcons reference. Don't get mad at me. But they'll continue to, let's say, ascend. That's better. They'll continue to ascend up to the second team, up to the first team, and start getting more of those reps. So that's a big thing that I'm going to be watching over the defensive side when it comes to OTAs later on today. Some of the other things, obviously, that we're really excited about watching is, the continued development of the other new guys, Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard. They're not getting a lot of attention these days in terms of talk because we're talking about the rookies, but they're still new to the system as well over on the defensive side. So you want to see them continue to get more reps. So that's another thing that's kind of the balance that the Saints have to be able to strike, is that when they eventually start allowing and getting Bryan Bresee more and more involved in a greater amount of reps, that means fewer and fewer reps for a guy like Nathan Shepard, who's also just as new to the team. The difference is Bryan Bresee's jumping an entire competition level, so you probably want to get him involved as soon as he's ready. But he's got to prove, of course, that he's ready first. The next thing, of course, that you're watching is attendance. We're waiting to see what Marshawn Lattimore is going to be there, what that means for CB2. Alontae Taylor, Paul Sadibo are going to be very intriguing to watch. I know you're waiting for me to say the name, Smoke Monday. We're all very excited to see what Smoke Monday is going to be able to do and all the different places where he can line up and all of that as well. So there's a lot of good stuff to watch during OTAs over on the defensive side. If there's anything in particular that you want to hear about, let me know. Hit me up however, wherever within the Saints Mediaverse, the Locked On Saints Mediaverse. You can get in touch with me anytime, anywhere you want. And let me know what are some of the things that you're looking for, and I'll make sure that I report back over the course of the week. We'll be back later on today as soon as I get home from OTAs, and I'll try to schedule it out and get things up at least an hour in advance and stuff. I know sometimes I get home and then have to go live within 5 minutes, and I'm sorry about that, but I'll try to get a little bit more lead time in for you. But expect something around 5 or 6 p.m. Central Time. And so we'll go live. We'll give you everything you need to know from OTAs. They will continue to track all throughout the week, just like we did last week. So lots of good stuff on the way as 2-a-days continue to roll on here on Locked On Saints. Appreciate you as always for making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you want to continue the conversation from here, head over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints today. And if you need more in between these episodes on your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter as well at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.